Imagine waking up one morning to the thunder of foreign boots on your homeland, the sky filled with unfamiliar aircraft, and the horizon crowded with warships cutting through icy fjords. This was Norway in April 1940, a nation suddenly thrust into the chaos of World War I. Germany had launched a lightning-fast invasion, seizing key ports along the coast with astonishing speed, catching the Norwegian military off guard and leaving both civilians and soldiers scrambling to respond. From Oslo in the south to Narvik in the north, German forces moved with precision, occupying towns, ports, and strategic positions before the Allies could organize an effective resistance. Yet, the German Navy, though bold and aggressive, faced stiff challenges from the British fleet, which patrolled the North Sea and sought to disrupt supply lines and troop movements. Battles at sea became a deadly game of cat and mouse, where every decision could mean life or death for sailors and soldiers alike. The stakes were unimaginably high, and the fog of war blurred the lines between triumph and disaster. For the average Norwegian, the invasion was bewildering. Many had never seen a foreign army on their soil, and the sudden arrival of German troops created a mixture of fear, confusion, and defiance. Stories emerged of soldiers facing towering mountains, icy waters, and snow-laden landscapes completely unfamiliar to them. Despite Germany's swift advances, the human cost of this campaign: lost lives, captured towns, and the shock to an unprepared population was staggering. The situation was further complicated by intelligence and communication challenges. Both sides struggled to gather accurate information, relying on maps, reports, and intercepted messages. Germany, for instance, was able to read some British naval signals, giving them an advantage at sea, while the Allies were just beginning to unlock the secrets of the Enigma machine. A breakthrough that would eventually change the course of the war, but not in time to prevent chaos in Norway. This story is not just about military strategy and battles. It is about human resilience, quick thinking under pressure, and the unpredictable nature of war. It is a story of a nation caught in the storm, of soldiers facing conditions they could hardly imagine, and of civilians striving to survive while their world transformed around them. If you are fascinated by history, by the drama and strategy of World War I, and by the untold stories of those who lived through it, you are in the right place. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the most pivotal moments in history. Join us as we uncover the human stories behind the headlines and explore the complex, riveting events that shaped the world we live in today. As Germany pressed forward into Norway, the Allies scrambled to respond, but their efforts were haphazard at best, a reflection of the unpreparedness that plagued much of the early war period. Britain and France, recognizing the strategic importance of Norway's ports and resources, dispatched forces across the North Sea in a rush to halt the German advance. Yet the operation was plagued by an almost comical level of disorganization that would have tragic consequences. The soldiers who arrived were often poorly trained, many of them territorial units who had never faced real combat, and even fewer had experience operating in harsh, mountainous terrain blanketed in deep snow. These men were thrust into a conflict that required coordination, maps, and supplies that were either missing, incomplete, or entirely unfamiliar to them, and they were expected to carry out complex maneuvers in a foreign country while facing a battle-hardened enemy who had planned their invasion with ruthless efficiency. The logistical nightmare began before they even reached the Norwegian coast. Troop transports were loaded in haste, often without adequate consideration for the specific needs of the soldiers aboard, and vital equipment was left behind or misallocated. Ski bindings essential for mobility in the snow were missing for some units, while weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies were scattered across ships, leaving men to improvise under conditions where improvisation could cost lives. Communication was another critical weakness. Radios were scarce, Maps were outdated or poorly detailed, and there was no secure method to transmit intelligence from command centers in London to units in the field. Orders changed frequently, sometimes by the hour, forcing officers and soldiers alike to make decisions in uncertainty, and the piecemeal nature of the landings meant that no cohesive front could be established to resist the German advance. Soldiers disembarking at ports such as Namsos, Harstad, and Andalsnes were often isolated, with little knowledge of the larger strategic picture, facing an enemy that, by contrast, had rehearsed and planned every step of their advance with meticulous attention. The terrain itself compounded the chaos. Norwegian winters were unforgiving, with deep snow, frozen rivers, and mountainous passes that were entirely unfamiliar to many of the British and French troops. Men who had never seen mountains now found themselves staring up at towering ridges that blocked their path and limited their movement, while weather conditions grounded air support and made resupply nearly impossible. The local population could not provide guidance, as many were in hiding or actively resisting the invasion, leaving the Allies without both local knowledge and civilian cooperation. Every step forward was a struggle, not just against the Germans, but against the environment itself, which seemed determined to punish the unprepared and the ill-equipped. Despite these obstacles, the Allied forces pressed on, driven by urgency and the stakes of the larger war, but their actions often appeared disjointed and reactive rather than strategic. Small units advanced into positions with no clear understanding of how they fit into the larger campaign, sometimes duplicating efforts or leaving flanks exposed, while orders from higher command arrived late or not at all. Miscommunications led to units retreating unnecessarily or advancing into ambushes, and the lack of unified command made coordinated action nearly impossible. Soldiers depended on improvisation, personal courage, and sheer endurance, but the structural failures in planning and supply undermined even the bravest efforts. The experience of these troops illustrates a broader truth about warfare, even when resources and manpower are available. Without preparation, training, and logistical foresight, an army can be rendered ineffective, vulnerable not only to the enemy but also to the unforgiving environment and the chaos of uncertainty. Meanwhile, German forces exploited these weaknesses with methodical precision, while the Allies struggled to assemble, move, and supply their troops. The Germans advanced with panzer battalions and Luftwaffe support where weather permitted, using superior coordination and local intelligence to outmaneuver the Allied forces. They captured strategic points that should have been defended more effectively and forced retreats by exploiting gaps and weaknesses in the Allied deployments. Every delay, every misstep by the Allied troops allowed Germany to consolidate its gains, strengthen its positions, and press the advantage, turning what could have been a coordinated resistance into a series of isolated, desperate engagements where survival often depended more on luck and resilience than on strategic foresight. Stories from the front illustrate the human dimension of this chaos. Young men from London and other parts of Britain found themselves in freezing fjords, staring at mountains they had never imagined, carrying equipment that was incomplete or broken, and facing a seasoned enemy who seemed to anticipate their every move. Officers struggled to maintain morale and discipline while making impossible decisions with inadequate information. In some cases, entire battalions had to retreat to points of landing they had already left, exhausted and demoralized, while others were left stranded with insufficient supplies. The psychological strain was immense, as soldiers realized that they were not just fighting the Germans, but battling the immense complexity of executing an underprepared military operation in hostile terrain with inadequate support. Ultimately, the Allied campaign in Norway during this early period serves as a striking lesson in the importance of preparation, logistics, and coordination. Courage and determination alone could not compensate for a lack of planning and organization. The piecemeal landings, the insufficient equipment, the constant confusion over orders, and the struggle against an unforgiving landscape created a scenario in which even well-intentioned efforts often failed, demonstrating that in war, as in life, strategy, preparation, and adaptability are as vital as bravery and resolve. The campaign set the stage for subsequent operations in Norway, revealing the cost of haste and the consequences of improvisation under pressure. And it remains a compelling story of human resilience amid chaos, a vivid example of how even modern armies can falter when the foundations of planning and coordination are not firmly established. Amid the chaos of the Norwegian campaign, intelligence emerged as a decisive yet paradoxical force, shaping the conflict in ways that were as subtle as they were powerful, often revealing how the fog of war extends beyond the battlefield itself. Both Germany and the Allies were operating with incomplete information, struggling to understand not only the terrain and the disposition of enemy forces, but also the intentions behind each movement, the timing of reinforcements, and the strategic objectives that guided every decision. Germany, for its part, had the advantage of intercepting British naval signals, gaining glimpses into the organization and movements of their adversaries in the North Sea. An edge that allowed their ships and troops to anticipate certain actions and exploit gaps in Allied planning. Yet even this advantage was not absolute, and the fluidity of naval engagements meant that information alone could never guarantee victory. It had to be applied with skill, timing, and coordination, and the Germans demonstrated a degree of tactical instinct that allowed them to turn these intercepted signals into operational success. On the British side, the work at Bletchley Park marked a turning point in cryptographic history, as codebreakers began to unravel the Enigma cipher used by the German Army and Air Force during the Norwegian invasion. The breaking of the key, a triumph of ingenuity and intellect, promised a flood of intelligence. Troop movements, supply lines, operational plans, and strategic intentions became readable in ways that could have transformed the Allied response. Messages that might have taken hours to decode were now accessible within the same day, offering insights that, in theory, could have allowed commanders to make informed decisions, anticipate German advances, and deploy their limited forces more effectively. In practice, however, the flow of this intelligence collided with the stark realities of wartime logistics and communication. Field commanders had no secure channels to receive the decrypted messages. The Army and Navy were not prepared to act on information that could not be fully explained without revealing the secret of the code breaking. And there was no system in place to collate, prioritize, and disseminate the insights to the units who needed them most. This disconnect created a situation that was almost tragically ironic. Britain, on the brink of possessing one of the most sophisticated intelligence tools of the era, was unable to leverage it in a way that could meaningfully influence the unfolding campaign. Meanwhile, German forces, operating with less advanced technology but a more immediate understanding of the operational picture provided by intercepted communications, were able to exploit the weaknesses of the Allies and consolidate their gains in Norway. The disparity between intelligence collection and practical application became painfully evident in the piecemeal landings, the mismanaged supply chains, and the confused orders that reached British and French troops struggling through deep snow and unfamiliar mountains. Soldiers acted in isolation, unaware of the broader strategic context and opportunities to strike, defend, or maneuver effectively were missed not because of bravery or lack thereof, but because information, no matter how valuable, remained trapped in the confines of bureaucracy and untested systems. At the same time, the psychological impact of intelligence or the lack of it cannot be underestimated. Officers and soldiers faced uncertainty not only about the enemy's location or strength, but about the reliability of their own planning. Decisions had to be made on incomplete or outdated information, often with life or death consequences. The German success in Norway was therefore not solely the result of superior firepower or training. It was also a reflection of how effectively they could integrate the intelligence they did possess into operational decision-making, while the Allies struggled to bridge the gap between insight and action. This imbalance created a feedback loop in which successes and failures reinforced perceptions of competence or vulnerability, influencing subsequent choices and movements in ways that were rarely straightforward. The story of intelligence in the Norwegian campaign also highlights a broader truth about war. Knowledge alone is insufficient without the structures, discipline, and processes to use it effectively. The British breakthrough with Enigma would eventually become a game changer in the wider war, providing critical advantages in battles yet to come. But in April 1940, it was an untapped potential, a promise that could not yet be fulfilled. Conversely, the Germans demonstrated that even partial information, when paired with flexible tactics, local initiative, and effective command, could have a decisive impact, underscoring that victory often lies not merely in the collection of secrets, but in the ability to act upon them at the right time and place. Soldiers on the ground, unaware of these intelligence triumphs and failures, experienced the results in the form of unexpected attacks, strategic retreats, and the constant need to adapt to conditions that seemed ever-changing and unpredictable, revealing the human dimension of intelligence, the way it shapes experience as much as outcomes. As the campaign progressed, the lessons of intelligence in Norway would reverberate far beyond its snow-covered fjords, illustrating that the most sophisticated tools are only as effective as the systems and people that wield them, and that in war, clarity of information and decisiveness of action are inseparable. The interplay between what was known, what was applied, and what remained obscured created a dramatic tension that defined the Norwegian theatre, a tension mirrored in the faces of soldiers trudging through icy passes, in the maps spread across command tables, and in the invisible threads of code-breaking machines that hummed tirelessly in rooms far from the battlefield. The story is not just about ciphers and intercepted messages, but about human ingenuity, adaptation, and the consequences of failing to turn potential into practical advantage, showing that in the theatre of war, knowledge must meet execution or risk being lost amidst the chaos of unfolding events. As the Norwegian campaign unfolded, the stark contrast between preparation and improvisation became increasingly apparent, with the bravery of the defenders standing in sharp relief against the calculated advances of the German forces. General Otto Ruge, commanding the Norwegian army, faced an unprecedented challenge, a nation caught off guard by a lightning-fast invasion, with soldiers who were courageous but largely inexperienced, and a landscape that could be as much an enemy as the invading forces. From the snow-laden mountains to the icy fjords, Norway's terrain was both a natural defense and an obstacle, and Ruge sought to use it to his advantage, positioning his troops in passes, along rivers, and near key transportation routes in an effort to delay the German advance long enough for Allied reinforcements to arrive. The initial resistance was determined and resourceful. Norwegian soldiers improvised defensive positions, moved artillery to unexpected locations, and leveraged their knowledge of the land to challenge the German momentum wherever possible. Despite their courage and tactical ingenuity, the Norwegian forces were soon confronted with a combination of technological and strategic pressures that tested the limits of their endurance. German panzer units, moving with a precision and coordination that came from thorough planning, struck at critical points, forcing local defenses to bend, in some cases, break. The Luftwaffe, though temporarily constrained by weather, would soon dominate the skies, providing reconnaissance, disrupting supply lines, and supporting ground operations with aerial bombardments that left Norwegian positions exposed. The interplay between mechanized warfare and air power created a dynamic battlefield in which Ruge's forces, despite their determination, were often outmatched, Each engagement became a delicate balance between holding ground and preserving the army for future operations, with soldiers acutely aware that every delay could be critical, yet every advance could exact a heavy toll in lives and resources. Weather compounded these challenges, turning already difficult terrain into a formidable opponent. Blizzards and persistent snowfall reduced visibility, slowed movement, and hampered communication, while freezing temperatures sapped the strength and morale of soldiers who had been trained for more temperate conditions. Rivers that could have served as defensive barriers became treacherous obstacles, and mountain passes, while offering strategic advantage, limited mobility and exposed troops to concentrated attacks. Logistics, already strained by hasty landings and piecemeal deployments, became a near impossible puzzle. Resupply convoys struggled to navigate snowbound roads, and units in isolated positions often faced shortages of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The combination of environmental hardship and enemy pressure created a relentless test of endurance, strategy, and human will, with each skirmish echoing the broader struggle of a nation resisting invasion under extreme conditions. Amid these hardships, individual stories reveal the human dimension of the campaign. Norwegian soldiers, many of them volunteers with little prior combat experience, faced not only the fear of battle but the constant challenge of operating in an unforgiving landscape. Artillery units dragged guns across frozen ground. Infantry advanced under the threat of aerial attack while navigating snowdrifts taller than themselves, and commanders coordinated movements with little more than maps hastily drawn and relayed under difficult conditions. Civilians, too, played a role, providing guidance, shelter, and support where possible. Yet they too were caught in the precarious balance of survival and resistance. The psychological strain was immense. Knowing that the enemy had mechanized units and air superiority, while relying on weather and terrain as a shield, forced both officers and soldiers to make rapid, high-stakes decisions, often improvising as the situation evolved in real time. The German forces, for their part, capitalized on every advantage, demonstrating the deadly efficiency of combined arms tactics. Tanks advanced in coordination with infantry, exploiting breakthroughs and threatening flanks, while aircraft reconnaissance enabled rapid adjustments to strategy, identifying weak points in the Norwegian positions. Every tactical success reinforced German momentum, and the experience of the Norwegian defenders highlighted the inherent difficulty of defending against a well-coordinated, technologically superior force, even with the advantages of local knowledge and prepared positions. Yet resistance persisted, not merely as a matter of military necessity, but as an assertion of national identity and determination, with Ruge's strategy emphasizing delay and attrition over outright victory, buying time for Allied landings and potential counteroffensives. The unfolding struggle illustrates the complex interplay of factors that define warfare: courage and ingenuity on one side, superior coordination and technology on the other, all moderated by the unpredictable influence of weather and terrain. The Norwegian forces' efforts were heroic yet constrained by circumstances beyond their control, while the German advance demonstrated how planning, mechanization, and adaptability could overwhelm even the most determined defenders. Each engagement, from small skirmishes in narrow valleys to confrontations along rivers and fjords, was a microcosm of the larger campaign, revealing both the human cost of conflict and the strategic lessons that emerge when preparation meets improvisation. In retrospect, the early battles in Norway underscore that success in war is rarely determined by bravery alone. It is the combination of preparation, coordination, technology, and adaptability that often decides outcomes. Ruge's resistance delayed German consolidation and demonstrated the power of well-positioned defenses. Yet it also highlighted the vulnerability of an under-resourced army facing an opponent who could combine mechanized strength with aerial dominance and operational precision. The campaign serves as a vivid example of the challenges inherent in defending against a rapid, multifaceted invasion, showing how environment, logistics, and morale intertwine with strategy to shape the course of events. The Norwegian forces' struggle was not only a story of battle but a testament to resilience under pressure. A narrative of a nation grappling with overwhelming odds while striving to assert its sovereignty. And a lesson in the intricate and often unforgiving nature of warfare, where every decision carries weight and every moment can tip the balance between survival and defeat. As the military situation in Norway continued to evolve, the occupation of the country revealed the complex interplay between politics and warfare, showing that control of territory required far more than battlefield victories. Following the rapid advance of German forces and the piecemeal arrival of Allied troops struggling to hold their positions, the question of governance in occupied Norway became increasingly urgent. Vidkun Quisling, the Norwegian politician who had attempted to establish a pro-German puppet regime, quickly proved incapable of exerting real authority. His government, hastily proclaimed and poorly organized, lacked both popular support and administrative cohesion, making it evident to German authorities that a more effective mechanism was required to maintain order and ensure compliance with occupation objectives. Quisling's brief tenure as a symbolic figurehead, while generating headlines and propaganda, offered little in practical terms and only underscored the challenge of imposing political control in a nation determined to resist foreign domination. In response, the Germans moved to restructure the administrative landscape, establishing an administrative council composed of Norwegian officials, including members of the Supreme Court, who could ostensibly work with King Haakon and maintain a veneer of national legitimacy while executing the directives of the occupiers. This council, chaired by Ingolf Christensen, served as an intermediary between the German military authorities and the civilian population, attempting to stabilize daily life, manage resources, and coordinate compliance with occupation policies. The creation of this council reflected a broader German strategy to consolidate control not only through force of arms but through the manipulation of local institutions, creating an appearance of continuity while ensuring that all decisions ultimately served the strategic interests of the Reich. For the Norwegian people, this shift signaled a subtle but unmistakable change in their circumstances. Quisling's theatrical claims to power were replaced by a more organized, bureaucratic framework that underscored the reality of occupation, while exposing the limits of any individual's ability to resist the overarching machinery of control. Parallel to these political maneuvers, Hitler sought to strengthen the military structures that would enforce German dominance and ensure loyalty within the ranks, commissioning the formation of the SS Nordland regiment, composed of German, Danish, and Norwegian volunteers. This unit was emblematic of the regime's broader ideological ambitions, reflecting both a desire to integrate occupied territories into the German sphere and to create elite forces capable of implementing strict control and responding to any form of resistance. The regiment's formation also served as a symbolic gesture, signaling to both the population and the broader German military that occupation would be accompanied by a disciplined, ideologically aligned force, reinforcing the permanence of German authority in Norway. This blending of political administration and paramilitary enforcement illustrated a calculated approach to occupation. Battlefield victories provided the initial leverage, but sustainable control required the integration of governance, propaganda, and military presence, each component reinforcing the others in a carefully orchestrated system of dominance. For ordinary Norwegians, these changes were experienced not only as a shift in governance but as an encroachment on daily life, as laws, regulations, and oversight began to reflect the priorities of the occupying power rather than the needs of the local population. Resistance, both overt and subtle, persisted, as communities adapted to survive under these new structures while maintaining a sense of national identity and solidarity. Reports from the period indicate a complex relationship between civilians and occupiers. Compliance in some areas was enforced through fear and coercion, while in others, subtle acts of defiance or non-cooperation allowed individuals and communities to preserve a measure of autonomy. The Administrative Council, while providing a framework for governance, could not erase the sense of alien control or the enduring spirit of resistance among the Norwegian people. And the presence of units such as the SS Nordland regiment made clear that any challenge to German authority would be met with a combination of ideological zeal and military precision. From a strategic perspective, these political and military developments were as critical as any engagement on the battlefield, demonstrating that control over territory in wartime extends beyond the immediate outcomes of combat. Hitler's decisions to replace Quisling with a council and to establish a specialized regiment were measures designed to ensure stability, enforce compliance, and integrate occupied Norway into the broader objectives of the Reich. They illustrate the layered nature of occupation, where psychological, bureaucratic, and military mechanisms intersect to consolidate power. For the Allies, the restructuring of Norwegian governance highlighted the urgency of their interventions, revealing that delays in mobilization and coordination could allow the Germans not only to win battles but to embed systems of control that would be difficult to dismantle once established. Each administrative move, each new unit deployed, reinforced the German presence and served as a reminder that warfare encompasses more than the clash of armies. It is a struggle over authority, legitimacy, and the ability to shape societies under the shadow of conquest. The intertwining of political and military actions during the occupation also underscores the resilience of the Norwegian nation, which, despite these pressures, continued to resist in ways both large and small. From covert communications to acts of civil defiance, the population found methods to assert agency, demonstrating that even under highly organized and intimidating control, human ingenuity and the desire for autonomy could not be fully extinguished. At the same time, the German approach, combining a restructured administrative framework with elite paramilitary units, revealed the calculated sophistication of occupation strategy, where winning hearts was secondary to establishing an enforceable system of obedience, and where symbolic gestures of legitimacy were carefully balanced with the tangible presence of power. Ultimately, the replacement of Quisling's government and the creation of the SS Nordland regiment were pivotal in consolidating German control over Norway, providing a template for how military conquest and political administration could operate in tandem to achieve both immediate and long-term objectives. These measures, interwoven with the ongoing military campaign, the intelligence battles, and the harsh realities of terrain and weather, complete the picture of Norway in 1940. A nation confronting an external threat through both military resistance and civic perseverance, while the occupiers employed every tool at their disposal, strategic, bureaucratic, and ideological, to solidify authority. The campaign thus serves as a vivid study in the complexities of occupation, demonstrating that the exercise of power in wartime extends far beyond the front lines, touching every aspect of society and leaving an enduring legacy on those who experience it. As the campaign in Norway drew on, it became increasingly clear that the conflict was not solely fought with rifles, tanks, and aircraft, but also in the minds of the people caught between invader and defender, revealing the profound influence of information, perception, and propaganda in shaping the course of history. The Norwegian population, despite the overwhelming force arrayed against them, demonstrated remarkable resilience and defiance, refusing to passively accept occupation even as German troops advanced and imposed their authority across towns, ports, and strategic passes. Civilians and soldiers alike adapted to the hardships imposed by the harsh terrain and harsh weather, relying on local knowledge, ingenuity, and sheer determination to maintain a measure of autonomy in the face of adversity. Every act of resistance, whether it was sabotage of infrastructure, hiding of supplies, or the subtle defiance of orders, contributed to a collective assertion that Norway's sovereignty and identity could not be easily erased, showing that even in the midst of military defeat, the human spirit could remain unbroken. Yet the Germans, keenly aware of the importance of perception, wove a narrative designed to justify their presence and actions, seeking to frame the invasion as a protective measure rather than an act of aggression. Propaganda campaigns portrayed German troops as guardians, sent to shield Norwegians from imagined threats posed by the British or other external forces, while simultaneously highlighting the purported chaos and incapacity of local governance before the occupation. Leaflets, speeches, and carefully managed interactions with civilians aimed to create a veneer of legitimacy, attempting to shape public perception and dampen resistance. In practice, however, the Norwegians saw through much of this messaging, recognizing the reality of occupation and the imposition of foreign control, and responding with a combination of defiance, subtle sabotage, and continued loyalty to their own government in exile and King Haakon. The tension between imposed narratives and lived reality illustrates a fundamental lesson of warfare. The control of information can be as powerful as the control of territory. Yet it is never absolute, and its effectiveness depends on the credibility of the source, the experiences of the audience, and the broader context in which it is received. The Norwegian campaign thus offers a striking case study in the dual battles of war: the physical struggle across mountains, fjords, and snowbound valleys, and the equally critical struggle over hearts, minds, and understanding. Soldiers on the ground experienced the immediate consequences of superior German tactics, mechanized units, and coordinated air support, yet they also contended with the intangible effects of propaganda, misinformation, and the challenge of maintaining morale in an environment of uncertainty and danger. For civilians, the battle of perception was no less real. The ability to discern truth from manipulation could mean the difference between compliance and resistance, safety and punishment, hope and despair. These dynamics remind us that war is never solely a contest of force, but a complex interplay of strategy, narrative, and the human response to both, where the stories told and believed can influence decisions as profoundly as any military maneuver. Reflecting on the events of April 1940, it becomes apparent that the Norwegian campaign, while a tactical and operational struggle, was also a lesson in resilience, adaptation, and the limits of control. The Allies' delayed and piecemeal landings, hindered by poor coordination and logistical challenges, demonstrated how even well-intentioned interventions can falter without preparation and communication, while German successes underscored the effectiveness of combined arms, strategic intelligence, and disciplined execution. Yet, underlying all of these military and political maneuvers was the reality that neither occupation nor propaganda could fully suppress the will of a people determined to preserve their identity, culture, and freedom. Norway's resistance, in its many forms, illustrates that human agency persists even in circumstances dominated by force, that perception can shape the course of events as powerfully as action, and that the lessons of this campaign extend far beyond the immediate battlefield into the enduring understanding of conflict, governance, and resilience. As we conclude this chapter of World War II history, it is worth remembering that the events in Norway were part of a broader narrative, one in which strategy, intelligence, courage, and communication intersected in ways that continue to resonate today. The story of the Norwegian campaign reminds us that victory is never determined by force alone, that control of information and the ability to influence perception are critical components of any conflict. and that even in the darkest moments of occupation, human determination can manifest in ways both subtle and profound. By studying these historical episodes, we gain insight not only into the mechanics of warfare, but into the enduring qualities of resilience, ingenuity, and moral courage that define the human experience in times of crisis. Thank you so much for joining me in exploring the scramble for Norway, a story of courage, strategy, and the power of information in wartime. If you enjoyed this journey through history and want to continue uncovering the pivotal moments that shaped the world, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Your support allows us to keep bringing these stories to life, diving deep into the events, people, and lessons that continue to resonate today. And together, we can explore history in a way that is engaging, thought-provoking, and unforgettable.